Biologicals for pest management and plant health has held up really well. Why? Because investors are seeing that this is the future, that biologicals can offer an advantage. And okay, you're gonna be fine. They offer an advantage, but a lot of companies are being sold to bigger companies. So I'll show you, the big companies are jumping into this area forever. Now for the last few 10 years. But I was tapping into the microbiome long before it was trendy. I always loved to work with microbes. Why? Because where I grew up in southern Connecticut, the gypsy moths, now that's not a politically correct name anymore, it's called the spongy moth. And that spongy moth would come through and devastate the trees, and the forest would be completely denuded. And there was that dogwood tree right outside the kitchen window. That's a fairly recent picture of this little house my father built. And with so many gypsy moths, he went out and he got a chemical carbaryl and he sprayed it. And my mother was furious because it killed all the lady beetles, lacewing, honeybees. So she banned him from ever using a chemical like that again. So he trots down to the farm store and he finds BT. Lo and behold, the first ever commercialized, and Brian Federich, my dear friend, has worked on that for so long. Yeah, it's so good to see you again after so many years. So that was the first commercialized biopesticide, and he sprayed it. And I said, Dad, how'd it work? And he goes, well, makes your mother happy. It's good for the environment, but I don't know if it works. That is the story of my career, showing that biologicals can work and what their value is. But so that got me into microbes, that there's these things in nature that you can control pests with. And I was a weird little girl that wanted to be an entomologist since I was 7 and pursued it totally, as you heard from Eileen, that for my whole career. So starting with Monsanto company, I was hired right out of graduate school to start up a new unit looking for new ways to control pests. They were just starting to transform crops to make GMO crops. But at the time, my boss was interested in natural products. So I set up the first ever microbial natural product screening program. And the first one to have developed a way to, in the lab, screen against corn rootworm. So they then Monsanto was able to engineer BT into corn to control corn rootworm. But anyway, at the time, that was the first automated high throughput screen looking for microbes that can control pests. And we screened over 150,000 microbes. Nothing ever became of that because I was switched into working on the GMO stuff, which of course was very successful. We proved in my group that insects will develop resistance to BT in a plant very quickly. And we published that, and that led to the rules at US Environmental Protection Agency that are now, I think we funded Brian, did we fund you on some of that work? On how to prevent insects from developing resistance, and that led to regulations regulating how we use those BTs, and so we can preserve that resource. I was called by Novo Nordisk, a company no one ever heard of back then, very small company now. Now it's huge, it's maker of Ozempic and Wegovy, so it's very well known, the richest company in Europe. But anyway, they called me and said, we want to set up a company somewhere in the US, screening microbes looking for natural products. I said, yeah, okay. And we picked Davis, California, screened another 55,000 microbes, and they sold us to our largest competitor after 5 years because they had some issues in their core businesses. And I started AgriQuest. And then, as you heard, we raised 60 million, almost got it public, but was taking the company on the NASDAQ stock market right before 9/11. That didn't happen. But screened another 22,000 microbes and discovered a big product, which is the biggest fungicide now. That company was later sold to Bayer Crop Science for almost 500 million. I had left and started at Marrone Bio, took it public on NASDAQ, screened another 18,000 microbes. I'm getting better each time, going from 150,000 microbes down to 18,000. And then the question is, we're doing the same thing now in the Invasive Species Corporation, looking for microbes that can control pests and various invasive species. How many do I need to test in order to find a commercial product? We shall see. So the whole biologicals area is growing at double digits compared to single digit chemicals. So all the categories, there's biocontrol, so biopesticides, biostimulants, which are natural substances and microbes that stimulate the plant, reduce crop stress. and then biofertilizers and biomethane that provides actual nutrition to the crop. All three areas are growing very fast, and so it's a great area to be in. Brazil, however, has surpassed the United States, lo and behold, in the size of the biologicals market. Why? Because they use chemicals so intensively that they got pest resistance, and the chemicals weren't working anymore, things like fall armyworm or other things, nematodes, and so they started trying biologicals. It was a failure at first, but then the government set up an extension all through each state in order to help the grower and educate them and maybe them in how to use these products successfully, because they have unique modes of action. Now, it is the biggest biologicals market, and also, by the way, the government has been approving them at a much faster rate than the US EPA, which is kind of clogged right now because it doesn't have enough resources. So now companies would always come to the US to develop the products first. Now everybody's going to go to Brazil. So if you look at the rates of growth, biologicals will exceed the chemical market in about 20, 25 years. Okay, my mother's almost 98, so I think I'll live long enough to see that happen. That would be my life's dream. To see them finally become as big, and the chemicals aren't going away, but the biologicals are certainly going to be bigger and incorporated more into programs on farms. And why are they growing so quickly? Because customers, growers are recognizing when you incorporate them properly into programs, they can offer higher yields and quality than chemical-only programs. They can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and sequester carbon and reduce carbon footprint. That is now scientifically being proven. My company had the first, Marrone Bio, had the first study showing we could reduce greenhouse gas emission compared to a cohort of synthetic chemical pesticides by over 90% reduction. And that was published, and now a lot of companies are coming up with that data. But also the tools we have today. We didn't have gene sequencing in my day, so we had to identify microbes using fatty acid analysis, and it was so crude, and we misidentified a lot of Serenade, which is a big product we discovered, was misidentified as Bacillus. It's really an amyloidization, as we know now. But you can sequence the whole genome of a microbe, so then you can figure out what compounds it might be making, or understand its physiology, and then you can optimize it a lot better and make better products than we put in the past. Same for delivery mechanisms. We have nanotechnology, encapsulation, and different things that can preserve and stabilize natural substances that we didn't have. So big companies I mentioned are very active getting into this. All my companies were acquired by larger companies. Most recent in 2022, investors want to get their money out, so they're actively trying to sell off the companies they invest in. But all the big companies now have major divisions that are working on biologicals. It's taken them a while to figure out how to sell biologicals into the market, because they take a little more work in order to educate the customer, the growers, on how to use these products successfully, because they have unique modes of action. But they're all in it. But this last year, we put together a map of what is the biologicals company universe, and it is so overwhelming. There's so many companies, there's thousands of companies now. We gave up at about, I think this is like 1,400 companies, and I'm sure there's more we missed. So it's a great time to be an entrepreneur in this space, but you've got to figure out how you're differentiating from somebody else in this marketplace. So suffice to say, there's a lot of biological entrepreneurs, and I'm always amazed at how many come up with new ideas that are unique and innovative, and come up with things that are differentiated from others. But you better understand how you're different from others if you're going to start up a company in this space, because it is ag tech and ag bio is getting very crowded, but there's still a lot of opportunities. So I advise several companies. Chonex trained black soldier flies to eat chicken manure waste and to convert it into a biofertilizer for soil regeneration. Marrone creates pheromones from nematodes for better soil pest management. Through algae grows algae in sunlight, and then harvests the water and boosts plants growth with that biostimulant. Illicit plant sprays natural plant sterols to reduce crop stress, and you can reduce water by 25%. crop irrigation, and increase yields by more than 10%. Root Applied Sciences uses in-field automated PCR to detect fungal pathogens and to tell farmers when the pathogens are actually out there, and better prediction of when they are there and when to spray. And she's been able to reduce California wine grape grower sprays by 40% for powdery mildew. Yeah, and she's doing also that lettuce down mildew. Intricacies makes peptides and has RNAi for soybean cyst nematode. Arbor took 3 of my products from Marrone Bio and also a supermarket waste to biofertilizer company in Sacramento during COVID. She launched online at $750,000 the first year, and now it's $5 million in sales. She got it to all the big box stores, Target, and Walmart. And I'm so excited to see my products in the, she has her own brand under Arbor, to see my products in the home and garden. That's really exciting for me to see that. I have one that's not ag, and it's state-of-the-art human therapeutic cell manufacturing in Sacramento of GP Global. So those are some of the companies I'm advising. I like to work with technical entrepreneurs because technical entrepreneurs have, which I'll tell later, have a challenge about communicating to the business side and sounding not like a scientist that can convince investors to invest in the company. Otherwise, you will be chief science officer, which is great, but if you want to be CEO, you've got to talk business too. So all my career, we have done traditional bioprospecting. We've looked for microbes from areas of high biodiversity, brought those samples back to the lab, isolated the microbes from those samples, and found commercial products quickly. So Serenade was found from the 713th microbe we found. The biggest product at Marrone Bio, Venerate, is on 25 million acres in the US right now, for insecticide and nematicide for soil treatment, soil seed treatment, was discovered from a Buddhist temple garden in Japan after only 396 microbes screened. So we've been able to find these things pretty rapidly and don't need to do a lot of microbes to find, a lot of samples to find these things. However, with all the tools we have today of machine learning and artificial intelligence, I think maybe we could find something using that method. But what I've learned after hiring 2 different AI companies who can write algorithms, but they can't help me find a microbe that is new or novel or is a new species. And I've always discovered new species. But I can say, I want this particular microbe to do this particular thing. Go find it for me in all the public databases in the world, or in the patent literature, or in the scientific literature. And there's a company that has what they call a database crawler to be able to do that. So that's pretty valuable. I don't care if it's already been invented. If we can find and use synthetic biology now to make it more efficiently now in fermentation and drive the cost down to make it commercial, because it was abandoned in the past because it wasn't cost effective enough, maybe AI can help me do that. So we're going to use the modern tools we have today, but at the same time, I'm putting my bets on my classical bioprospecting, that we're going to find some things from nature as well. So Serenade is a breakout product. That was the major product we discovered at AgriQuest. That's now $150 million in sales every year globally under Bayer. Bayer bought AgriQuest. It was also in Walmart. I think it might be still in Walmart, but Serenade Garden Disease Control. Walmart helped me get that into the stores, but they wanted the first organically listed product in 2003 was Serenade Garden. And that photo of the powdery mildew untreated and treated was famous. Photo from Gallo. I had a friend who was head of R&D for Gallo and hadn't allowed me to spray on their very high-end wine grapes, and that took that photo, and that I raised $4 million from that photo, showing that we had something. And so it's very exciting to see that become a very big product. Now, at Marrone Bio, we broadened out and we did a lot of products because the growers wanted a whole portfolio of solutions for all of their products, all their tests, and that's what we focused on. Regalia, so we got into some plant extracts too. Regalia, an extract of knotweed, a fungicide. Stargus we found from an organic rice field in Northern California. It's another fungicide for botrytis. Grandivo, we licensed from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It is a new species that was found from under a hemlock tree in Maryland. I mentioned Venerate was found from a Buddhist temple garden in Japan, new species. And Haven is an extract of coconut oil to reduce crop stress. So it's a very interesting product, and they're all growing very fast right now. Now, if you're developing a chemical pesticide, you spend $300 million in 12 years developing a product. I can get a product to market for $4 million and 4 years, so much less. There's an advantage to a biological, but when you do it that fast, you don't have thousands of field trials, to back your product. You have maybe 50 field trials. I do version 1.0, version 2.0, version 3.0. So I'm constantly improving the product, and you can do that with microbes in fermentation and developing new versions of it. That's a very different business model than the big chemical companies that do everything up front and then launch big. So it's a very different way of doing business. But why did I do it that way? Well, I couldn't get a product out faster, and I found that there were growers, early adopters, who wanted the product because it met a need in the market that they wanted. So they said, don't wait, get it out, we'll test it for you. So I used early adopter growers as ways to give me feedback about the product to develop the MVP, or the minimum viable product, which all entrepreneurs talk about today. And any investor will say, well, what's your MVP? When are you getting your MVP out the door? Okay, so it's important as an entrepreneur to get something out commercially and get it vetted with customers and do that quickly, and because you don't have the money that big companies do. And if you do have a lot of money, like let's say you're a startup and you've raised $70 million, then you sort of lose track in what you're doing. It's much better to have less money and then get something out the door, get some revenue that feeds back into the company. So what's the best thing to do though is talk to your customers. What's out there? Remember, this biological space, this agtech space is very crowded. Well, there's still a lot of unmet needs. Remember I mentioned there's $60 billion, $70 billion worth of chemicals still used today. And yet we still have hundreds of billions of dollars of crop damage. I could talk to growers in California. I'm doing a biological project with Western growers, and they will tell me all litany of pests and diseases they still need solutions for. And there's also new invasive pests that come in and they don't have solutions for. And the state of California takes away, restricts the chemicals, and they're left without solutions. So talking to your customers is the best thing you can do to craft your idea about what you want to do as an entrepreneur. Now, you can take several years. I know companies that have taken 10 years or 15 years in biologics to get a product to market. By the time they get to market, the whole market has changed, the world has changed, the technology's changed, and so you might be behind the times because new competitors have already come in and beat you. So my philosophy is, because of the change of technology and the speed of the world today, it's better to get your minimum viable product out the door in customers' hands first. It's got to be good enough. Doesn't have to be perfect, but good enough that meets a need in the market, because you don't know what's going to be happening in 5 years or 10 years, right? So I'm going to talk about the money. So as an entrepreneur, I'm a scientist, PhD entomologist, who learned how to raise money. I found out I was good at it because you can tell I love what I'm doing. So I was able to transfer that passion about what I'm doing to talk about and sell the company to investors. And that's what it is. It's a sales process. Are you a good salesperson as a scientist? Then you'll be a good entrepreneur. So at AgriQuest, I won't talk about Novo Nordisk because agtech was funded by, I didn't have to raise as much money because they gave me the money. But in AgriQuest, I was on my own. So this is a long time ago. Conceived of the company, raised money from friends and family, and then started the lab, discovered Serenade when we only had friends and family money, and hired my first 3 scientists from Entotech. Ran out of money, tapped my friends and family again, and then discovered yeah, and then when we got that picture from Gallo about the product working so well, and then I went to an investor fair, pitched, and then there was a woman from Rockefeller and Company who had the first ever fund to fund women, minority, and environmentally friendly businesses, and she gave me $4 million. So that was, I was on my way. So I raised a round of financing every year up to $60 million, and then was ready to go public and listed on the stock market. And then 9/11 happened. I filed for the offering right before 9/11. I was actually flying to New York to kick off the road show to go meet investors on September 12th. That never happened. So the mere event world event of 9/11 dropped the value of the company down very low. And it allowed one of our pretty sharp-like investors to take over the company and wiped out all of the value I had in my founder stock with the terms. And I took the money at those terms because our board was very dysfunctional and I needed the money and the company wasn't where I wanted it yet. It was like a teenager and I needed to get to an adult. And so I said, okay, I'll put my ego aside and I'll just take the money at those horrible terms, even though it wiped out a lot of my founder's stock value and get the company to where I needed to. And I did that. And then I left to start up Marrone Bio. And then a couple years later, it was sold to Bayer for almost 500 million. So it was a very good lesson on what terms not to give investors. So, I don't need to belabor what those terms are, but you have a good lawyer who will tell you, don't do this because it allows investors to take over and wipe you out as a founder. A little better at Marrone Bio. But I did have my challenges. So started in April 2006, named the company after my father, who was dying at the time. Had an illness, and so everybody thinks it's named after me, but it's actually named after my dad. We had I brought this founding team who funded the early work, again, friends and family. Then quickly was able to raise $1 million from local angels, high net worth individuals, and some past investors, and then kept raising money. And then so raised, I think it was like 60-70 million before we went public. And then August 12th, 2013, we listed on NASDAQ as MBII and raised 100 million in 2 rounds of financing. So how did we do that? Well, we talked to a lot of investment bankers, Goldman Sachs and Jefferies and JP Morgan, these big investors and investment banks, and said, what do we need to do to go public? Because our investors who own the company were pushing us to get them an exit. And so we put together a company event and we mapped out every single quarter of what we needed to do in order to be eligible to do this public offering. And in 2 offerings, we did raise 60 and then 40 and travel all around the country and Europe and talk to pitch to investors and raise that money. It was the most fun I have ever had in my life. We rang the bell in NASDAQ and my mom was there. She's now almost 98 and her sister is almost 92 was there, and it was the most exciting time. But what can happen? Okay, well, suddenly 1 year after the IPO, our COO, who is our head of sales, they just promoted to chief operating officer, he suddenly resigned from the company. So after he resigned, a customer told us that he did some side deals with him that were fraudulent. I'm like, oh, this is bad. So we reported that to the board, who then by law has to report it to the Securities and Exchange Commission, who regulates public companies. And they independently had to hire a lawyer to do a forensic investigation about what happened. Found out he was doing all these side deals with customers. He was also stealing money from the company. And our stock dropped from $10 per share down to 69 cents. I watched millions of shares being sold off. I cried. It was so upsetting. And then the board was I call it the Game of Thrones time, because the board was very dysfunctional, or the Lord of the Flies. The management team was eating each other, and the board was dysfunctional, and so they brought in they thought I was guilty by the board, and so they put me aside sort of as a figurehead. So during that time, they brought in like a successor to me. They hired a guy who they thought was going to take over for me, and they were going to fire me. So it turns out he didn't know what he was doing, really. So me and my CFO, Chief Financial Officer, who is now my co-founder of the new company, we went to some board members and said, look, you're ruining the company. We want to take it back and get it back on track. And so they said, I was able to swing one board member, so it was 4 to 3 against me, 4 for me, and was able to swing the board to say, okay, you've got the keys back to the company, do what you want with it. We restructured the whole company and we had record profit growth. We didn't get profit yet, but we had good sales of the product. The product itself became more profitable in the manufacturing. So, we went compounded annual growth rate up, and then we, brought the profit of the product, the gross margin, they call it, up. And, I announced I was retiring in 2020, and notice the stock went down after that. And that means you just like me, it's good. It went down, and unfortunately, after the new CEO took over, the stock hit a new low. But fortunately, we had a buyer, and the company was sold for a good price, considering the low stock price for $260 million in July 12th. I had a non-compete agreement. California doesn't allow non-competes, but they do if they pay. So they paid me for 3 years not to do anything competitive with them. And then when that was up, August 2nd of last year, I fully went and announced the new company, because we will be competing with my old company, which I have done each time. So, but that's the way it is if you're getting into some interesting areas. But I was able to get more investor money and save the company and so forth. So that was quite the thing. So what have I learned? Well, you need to raise money when you don't need it. It always takes longer than you think. And you have to move fast when the window is open. So world events, COVID, 9/11, what have you, the Great Recession, markets close. So if it's open, you go and you raise money, as much money as you can when investors are happy. And I've had investors pull out of the deal on the day they were supposed to give me money in the bank. And if I didn't have backup plans, I would be dead. So I always had backups to backups, and I always planned for disaster. A lot of entrepreneurs don't, and so then the company goes belly up if they don't have that. But what I've learned is that I have to select my financial partners very carefully, because I have piranhas and sharks and, you know, circling around. And my goal for this new company is to have none of those and have, well, every investor though wants a return, so you have to be careful. But even if they're nice people, but I'd rather have non-jerks and nice people than the others. So anyway, my goal is no a-holes in the company, yeah. So, and I always have a backup plan and a backup to a backup. So I never ran out of money. And that served me well. And as I already mentioned, use what they call the lean startup methodology to get a product out the door quickly. So as a technical founder, you know, how did I do this? Well, I did have to practice minimizing the technical language and scientific terms. You know, there's a lot of jargon in science, right? And so, you know, some investors didn't even know what a Petri plate was. So you have to be very basic. And so, you know, I would get deeper when they would have their PhDs in the venture fund to talk to me. But the original, you know, you have to be very basic. And especially when I was doing the roadshow for the IPO, those Wall Street guys, they manage like, you know, $200 billion fund, like the Fidelity or Vanguard or whatever. And you don't want to waste your time, so you have to get down and tell you exactly what you're doing. And I had one guy say, you know, Pam, I invested in you because you didn't waste my time. The guys would come in and they would talk sports, and it would waste the 5 minutes talking sports and what happened in sports. You just went in, boom, you were all business. I said, oh, for once, my style worked for me. You know, I was always told you got to be more chatty, and you can't be so business, you know, you can't be so full of business. You can't just get into it like that. You got to be nice for them. Okay, well, I was like, I understood. He understands. It's like, I don't have $200 billion fund. I don't have 5 minutes to waste on sports. You know, so that was pretty fun. Anyway, I emphasize the qualifications of the science team who are doing the science. No, I haven't worked in the lab since 1985. So no, I'm not in the lab. No, I can't be chief science officer. I think I must have messed it up. I have other people to do that. And I actually wrote the financial plan or the financial model for Marrone Bio so I could understand how the financial worked. And I did pretty well. And then I had an accountant review it. And they said it was 90% right. So that was really educational. And always was talking the return on investment of our product to growers. So what was it, 3 to 1? Was it 10 to 1? You know, so quantifying the benefits of our product commercially and mathematically was really important. But the customers were loyal to me. Through all thick and thin, through all of our challenges, and they kept buying even during our darkest days. By the way, that guy who committed the fraud, he just got out of jail. He pled guilty. He avoided jail for a while, but he went and he served his time in jail, and he's out now, but anyway, he was arrested and is in jail. So the customers were loyal because the products were science-based. So while investors were often put off by all the science oh, you're just a science product, Marrone. The customers appreciated it, both the growers and the distributors who sold to the growers, because they were innovative and we could tell them the differentiation and how the products were scientifically. And that's more important today than ever with how crowded it is. If you can explain the science of your product clearly and concisely to a customer, that is very powerful. So I just learned all about the resources for entrepreneurs here at UCR, which is great. And then there's a lot of incubators. There's so many startup incubators now in the clean tech, biotech, and agtech area. So you don't have to be alone. So now I didn't have these resources when I started. Now there's lots of resources to help you craft your message, get your slide deck ready, talk to investors, find resources, etc. And I'm really excited to see what's going on here. What are some of the lessons I've learned? Well, my biggest mistake was who I hired. Oh my gosh, I hired a guy who turned out to be criminal. So this was bad. So hiring poorly is number two. But number one, it seems obvious, building something no one wants. But I talk to entrepreneurs every single week who has their favorite microbe that's coming with something that stimulates the plant. And I'm saying, well, 3 to 5% yield increase, that's not good enough now. You have to have 10%. So you have to really be careful about not falling in love with your technology, but you have to look at the universe of what's out there. Otherwise, you will build something no one wants. And I do see some companies very well funded going belly up of late, unfortunately, who were, like I said, more products are better, but they were only slightly better than what's already out there. So it wasn't differentiated enough. But my hiring poorly, oh boy. So I found that I stopped focusing on experience and skills. I had the scientists to talk to the employees about that. I focused on, are you going to be a fit or an add to the culture? And do you adhere to the values that we have, core values of the company? So culture first and the other stuff second. And that way we were able to get better at hiring. So, and we also had the values after the whole crisis with the fraud. We put down, the company put down all the values that it wanted the company to adhere to. And every single month, I would have them write down on a piece of paper, what top 3 values were we adhering to most, best, and which ones were we worst at. And much to my dismay, the first time we did it, the one that scored the worst was having fun. I thinking that roll and grind, where it's too much work, too much stress. Okay, so I said, okay, guys, set up a committee, and you plan the events and have fun. And that committee still exists today at my old company, and they did a great job having fun, which was great. What were some of the others we didn't do well on? It was interesting, diversity. I thought we had 49% minority and 50% women. But I had an employee say we didn't manifest our commitment to DEI openly. So I put up a diversity wall right outside of my, right outside of my office, which is still there today. They didn't take it down, which really spoke to the art and photographs that spoke to Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and things, Eleanor Roosevelt. It really spoke to that diversity, and that was very powerful place. So I highly, there's a really good TED Talk from Seth Godin about how, when you want to make change in an industry, and way back when I had to change how these biologics were perceived, and when nobody wanted to use these biologicals. So you have to create a movement, and this is about how you create a movement and how you find your tribe of people. I had hired employees who would spend the first 6 months telling me our products didn't work as well as chemicals. I said, that's not true. You're just not testing them right. But I would say, why are you here? So I needed, and to this day, have to have real believers in that, believing that this technology is the future, and that's the kind of employees we find. So now when I'm interviewing, I've changed completely the questions we ask. So now it's, who's had the most influence on your career and in your life, and why? I want them to tell stories, not just yes or no answers. What's been your biggest challenge? Has anyone asked you to do anything that you felt was ethically wrong? And without telling me, breaking confidentially, what did you do? How did you handle it? Oh my God, the stories that come out there can really learn a lot. What types of people bug you? Oh, I really hated the supervisor. Well, why? Why did you hate that? Who was your best supervisor and why, you know? And then, you know, talk about your work ethic. What's your day, you know, what's your day like? What do you do during the day? Anyway, these kinds of questions really flushed out the values, the integrity, and the better fit with our company. So, why start again? And I'll wrap up with the Invasive Species Corporation. We still have big problems to solve. Our recent report, 120 countries in a new United Nations report came out in September, $423 billion of damage every year caused by invasive species, and we don't do a good job of controlling them. And so that's the whole raison d'etre, the reason why we exist at the Invasive Species Corporation. We want to make a little dent in that. Second largest cause of biodiversity decline, invasive species. So we have unique expertise to do this. I mean, we're a bunch of old baby boomers, our whole co-founding team, my old CSO, my old president and CFO, and his neighbor. And so, you know, we've been through the wars, and so we know how to develop a product, get it to market quickly, we know what to look for. And most importantly is, every time you start a company, you think you're going to develop the ideal culture of what you want, but sometimes when you get, well, it always happens, when you get a whole group of employees, 100, 150 employees, the culture drifts into something that's unrecognizable. So each time I try to get closer and closer to what I think is the ideal culture. So, let's see, okay. So products that we have for the company, Equinox, I took this over from my old company because they didn't want it anymore, and it's a Pseudomonas fluorescens strain discovered from a mussel-infested river in upstate New York that kills invasive zebra spider mussels, and it's a protein that's produced by the cells, and it disrupts the gut, kind of like BT does with insects, but with mussels. And we're selling that, we took that over, and then piscomycin, the US government came calling and said, would you please develop this? This was some orphan technology they needed to re-energize to control invasive carp. All 50 states have problems with invasive fish, which we're working on. It's a streptomyces that produces a compound that kills fish. And then we're working on bioherbicides. I want to crack before I retire. Everybody said, maybe you're going to be retiring very late. I said, no, we'll find it. I want to find a bioherbicide that can compete with some of the big chemical pesticides like glyphosate. It's a dream. I think we can do it now, perhaps with using synthetic biology to move genes for production production of metabolites from one host to another, and maybe get the level of the compounds high enough to be competing. We'll see. So we're doing also a bioprospecting approach, but a big market, $30 billion worth of chemicals, herbicides, very controversial herbicides. So we're going to try to crack that one. And we have our commitment is to have 8 products by 2030. And to spend no more than 25 million, to be very cash efficient. So that's what we're saying to investors. And just to end up, my lessons are, whatever you're doing, whether it's a tough PhD or postdoc project, or you're starting a company, is to take care of yourself. I remember being curled up on the couch when we were during our darkest days, and my husband, who, by the way, is the PhD clinical social worker, it was really nice to have him around, would roll me off the couch and say, go run, go swim, go bake, go garden, whatever, do something else. So I had a great support system with him, and always, it's important, you can't do a startup unless you're following your passion. You know, and you have, or anything, or even, you know, whatever your path in life is, if you follow your passion, I think that will go a long way. And as I learned from my employees, change something if you're not having fun. So thank you very much. Thanks, Brian, for coming.
How was your transition from academia to business? You said that you learned the financials.
Yes.
How did you go about doing that? Did you pursue an MBA?
Oh, I wish I had pursued an MBA. So my advice to someone who wants to be on the business, my science business would be to get an MBA, but I didn't. So, but I did take lots and lots of classes, business classes, but it was apart from an MBA. But I probably took, I don't know, 20 different classes on business to learn, yeah. And also went to Silicon Valley, which is a great place to go to learn how to be an entrepreneur. And I took a boot camp from one of the big law firms there and how to start a company, and it was a day. I said, okay, I learned it, that's fine. You know, like they gave you, it was very formulaic, I said, okay, I can do that. Now the incubators are much longer than that, but that was, oh, actually, no, you have some of that boot camp here at UCR too, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, okay.
So I teach, the NSF ISO program here.
Oh, I've been through my mentees, yeah.
We're good, I see a couple of my former students and current students here, so, first of all, I just want to say, that's possibly the best talk I've ever heard on, turning the scientific ideas.
I'm glad.
Really, and I hope it's recorded and we can use this,
It's being recorded.
Oh, it was recorded, oh, right, okay. I didn't know if I was supposed to talk into the microphone or look at the camera, but it should be fine. Yeah, okay.
Word's important too, so.
Yeah, I went through ICOR, and it was quite an experience because they had to talk to 100 customers. And I tell every entrepreneur, you better do that because that will differentiate, tell you what's out, whether you can make a product that someone will buy, right? Yeah. And yes, exactly. Oh, yeah, don't get your money if you don't do it, right? Yeah.
So I have a great question. Here's the thing is, you've got a wonderful company, and there's 1,000 or maybe at least a couple dozen others that will really great at bringing biological products to market. And then we've got art students who are mainly grad students, and they've got a lot of things going on, and they're not looking at it normally.
True.
And so, you know, how do you reconcile that? What would you recommend for the students here? Would you recommend just wrapping up your PhD quickly, then applying for a job with you? Or can you try to do both? Or, you know, how do we go from being who we are to where we?
Well, you know, not everybody can make that transition, speaking to your question. I've had chief science officers and heads of R&D who are so academic, I'm sorry to say it, not, I don't mean it negatively, but it was negative in the context of the company because they couldn't stop researching on something. And they kept researching, I said, you gotta get a product out the door, it's gotta be good enough, we have to get a product. Or they wanted to work on what they were comfortable with, rather than something that was more technically challenging. I don't think there's a formula for that, I think it depends on the person, of whether they're comfortable with taking a little risk and stopping, and knowing when it's good enough. And you know, that's not always easy to do, but I do think it's more individual, actually, individual person. Some people can do that, and other scientists just want to research, you know, they just want to keep researching something.
Yeah, there's nothing we can do with those who want to just be faculty because that's.
No, and that's great, I mean, as I said before, yeah, there's lots now with baby boomers retired, there's probably a lot more open faculty positions than there were in the past, so. But I hired for the first week, I put an ad on LinkedIn. It works so perfectly. So they have great AI algorithms, so they said, you could pay some money to post your job. So I wrote the job description, and then we have little sliders, and it's $700. But for me, that was very small. So 275 applications for the scientists. We were gonna hire one, we ended up hiring 3. And it was amazing, the qualification. So they push, when you pay, LinkedIn pushes to the qualified applicants. So we hired a PhD just right out of school, with her PhD, and she just last week went back to university where she was in Finland to defend her thesis, and all of us in the company were on at 3 a.m. listening to her thesis defense. They grilled her, boy. And so we hired right out of school. Actually, the other 2 were right out of school as well. So Brady's from UC Davis and Kara's from University of the Pacific. All 3 had 100% fit with our job qualifications. So the state of Washington and the Oyster Industry Association of Washington State called me and said, you have to help us. Like, no, I actually don't, but tell me what you want. I said, we need a solution to controlling burrowing shrimp that are invading our oyster beds and destroying our beds. So chemicals are banned, we have nothing. You know, farmers are going out of business. We need you to find a microbe to kill the shrimp. I did a little research and looked at the literature and said, oh yeah, there are microbes that kill crustaceans. Okay. Pseudomonas looks like a good one and such and such. So I said, okay, this is possible, technically. So we got this nice range, helped consultants to start up the lab. Well, Brady and Kara, both for their master's thesis, isolated microbes from shrimp. How can we get 100% on? And then Kara isolated, characterized endosymbionts from pine trees to see how they affected growth. And she isolated microbes from samples from Chernobyl where from birches within the site and then outside and compare the microbiome, and there were differences in microbiome. It's a very cool project, but anyway. So we've got some 3 great, and LinkedIn, better have, if you're looking for a job, start early and get a really nice profile on LinkedIn, put a picture up there and a nice profile of what you've done, and because that's where everybody goes. And they have really good AI, as I said, for helping find candidates. Yeah,
So you mentioned about putting the MVP, minimum valuable product, out there, like
yeah,
as fast as you can.
yeah.
But does it mean you have to bypass risk assessment?
No, absolutely not.
Safety?
No, because our product is regulated by the states as well as Environmental Protection Agency. So our MVP had to have the toxicology studies, everything that was required for regulation. Yeah, no, we had full compliance. So when you have an MVP, you do not want to sacrifice quality and performance. So you don't want to put out to your customers something that doesn't work, right? Just to get it out there. And we hear companies in both Silicon Valley as well as in other places where they have done that. And then, they just want to just get it out. And no, if you got to get it out, but you have to have work, but it does have to work. It has to have value for the customer, and you don't bypass it. Yeah, that's right. Good question though, yeah.
You mentioned that hiring is one of like your major things, to like
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
And also you mentioned that believing in like the idea
Yes.
was essential for hiring.
Yeah.
How do you balance believing with objectivity?
That is a really good question. Because, people will fib or lie during their job interviews and say they believe in the environment, or they want to save the planet or whatever. And so I did have a bunch of questions. One of my co-founder would ask, when we were at Ron Bryan, would say, do you recycle? And that sparked a lot of conversation. Because recycling can be very controversial, especially there's now saying that recycling isn't as green as we think it is, and all this stuff, and companies cheat and everything. So having an answer to that question, so we would have questions like that. Where do you think biologicals will be in 10 years? What do you think is the role of biologicals? If they said that, you could tell, because they would often be very, very honest and say, well, biologicals just gonna be a small part of the whole overall pest management program, then, okay, but if they said, well, I actually think that, biologicals could be the base of the whole pest management program. We have examples of that out here in the West. They use pheromones for, the base of the program, and only use chemicals when the moles are out of control. So there's examples of that. So we would ask those kinds of questions. Yeah. Try to get some objectivity to it. Yeah.
Do you have any advice for reaching out to investors and essentially selling them the product that you have not developed yet?
Well, that's a very good question, because so then you're relying on convincing them their technology is good enough to develop a product. But I'm working with lots of startups that are raising money, including raising money myself. We already raised $2.5 million for Invasive Species Corporation from an investor that made money at Marrone. So I had a little bit easier this time, but it's still very hard. But so it is about the technology. So you have to convince them that your technology can become a product, and how is it going to become a product. So you have to know enough about the commercial side of it. Is how long is that technology going to be baked? Do you have a proof of concept? If you already have a proof of concept, great. But if you don't, how quickly are you going to get your proof of concept? And what's your time frame? What's the regulatory process? Can you patent it? So all of those details around the technology will have to be communicated. I do see a lot of early stage investors investing in things that are pretty early, very early. Because their funds, that's what they do with their funds. And but it is again about communicating the potential of the technology to be a commercial product and the pathway for it to get there. Yeah. So a lot of times, entrepreneurs will have business people help them wrap that, business advisors.
So there's a question Ken asks, how about your thoughts to the areas of research at an institution such as UCR that would help advance biologicals using in agriculture?
Well, what are some of the weaknesses of biologicals today in competing with chemicals, or just in general? Well, these are natural substances, and you have a better faster regulatory process that they're not engineered. So although engineered microbes are certainly coming, but, what are some materials or formulations, nanotechnology or encapsulations that can stabilize those natural microbes or natural compounds that can make them last longer in the field? So if you have to spray a chemical every 3 weeks, but you have to spray biological every 10 days, that puts you at a competitive advantage. So can you develop something that lasts longer outdoors? That's one big thing. I think that's probably number one. Cost of manufacturing. Can you get the cost of manufacturing down to where it's really cost competitive with some of the lower priced chemicals? That certainly, if we could replace sulfur, and which is really cheap, and for powder mildew control at a cost that's maybe just only a little bit more than sulfur, then a lot of wine growers would switch. So I think cost effectiveness and field residual life are really two big things and in the research areas. But also for UCR, got some huge invasive species. I mean, and I know UCR is working on a lot of those, but again, talking to growers, there's tons of problems that still they have to solve. INSV, virus in tomatoes. There's a weed that just came into tomatoes up north, forget the name of it. So there's always something new that needs to be controlled. And so a fusarium insecticide resistant thrips. So we can, I talked to all of our growers and Western growers, and you'll come up with this whole list of things that still need, and that's what the land grant institutions are for, is to help solve those problems. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Ken, do you want to open your microphone so you can ask your question?
Yes. And
Ken, you can ask your question if you want to speak up.
you can speak. Just
Actually,
use your microphone.
you actually, the camera on top next to the clock.
Over there?
So yeah.
Oh, yeah, my back is different.
Yes. Say hi to Ken.
Ken.
Oh, so you actually asked my question and answered it. Thanks, Pam.
Okay. Yeah.
Any more questions on the floor? If not, please join me again to thank, Pam. Thank you all. There are pizza. And then.
Everybody find the Chinese steak if you haven't, please do, if we have.
I'm on LinkedIn if you want to connect.
Okay, thanks, Pam. Bye, everyone.
Bye now.
Thank you. See y'all.
Thanks, Jim. I did, thank you.
You can go.
Oh, yeah, I'll see you later.
You don't have to take back this first. Yeah, you are. Okay. Thank you. Bye.